Hi, I'm Ben Hinson, and welcome to Hickham's Dictum. Today we're going to answer the question, what is blockchain technology? And to help us answer that question, we're going to be talking to Bryant Nielson, amazing guru, technologist, and the founder of the Blockchain Academy in Englewood, New Jersey. Hi, Bryant.
Hey, how you doing, Ben?
Thanks for being here. I'm so honored to have you here. For you taking the time to talk to me and to come on my channel. Thanks again. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So before we get into the discussion, could you tell us a bit about the Blockchain Academy, all the good work you're doing here? You're an entrepreneur, obviously, and you're foraging to a space that's in high demand in the technology sector with finance and other applications. Could you tell us more of what you do, how you help people, how you help businesses? And so
Sure. Well, the Blockchain Academy is a training firm that actually has broken down its training deliverables into three channels. One is what we refer to as our corporate or enterprise channel, and that really helps senior managers or stakeholders or even other entrepreneurs to understand what are the capabilities of what blockchain technology is. The second channel is really what we refer to as our professional channel, so that will be programs for lawyers or for accountants, other professionals who are actually trying to understand how is blockchain going to impact the sectors that they support. So sectors like healthcare and what the impact is that going to be, not only in the sector, but also, say, for accounting. What is the accounting going to do? How is payments going to actually happen? And how is that going to be impacted? Or other sectors like insurance. How can you set up a new insurance policy for a very affordable thing? Or how do you get what's referred to oftentimes as the uninsured or the uninsurable to provide insurance programs for them? So that's our professional track, and then we have a developer track that allows for developers to learn the technology of their choice. We always start with a very broad understanding of architecture, blockchain architecture. We immediately go into blockchain security before we actually start to say, go build something. Because we really want to have the developers have a clear and concise understanding of what it is going to do and what is the sandbox that they're actually going to be playing in.
Wow. So from your business, and we'll get into blockchain in a second, but from your business model, do you normally engage with what level of stakeholders? Usually the head of the departments, or more the people who do the hands-on work, or both? What's your level of engagement? What's your touch point?
Well, I would say this, from our enterprise, it's really those stakeholders, that department heads, but we've done programs for board of directors.
Wow.
Letting them understand how it's going to be. Really what it comes down to is the people who have budgetary control of initiatives, any technology initiatives, needs to understand what the technology can actually do. And better their understanding is, the better that dialogue internally will be with what is this capabilities, how is this going to help the business, how can we align this type of deliverable with the other business objectives, and should we actually be making that investment into this new technology?
Wow. So to segue, a lot of people may not know what blockchain is, or they do not have a full, concise view of what blockchain actually entails. So I thought we will start with data first, right?
Sure. So
we use databases and data in our everyday lives with all kinds of transactions, whether you go to the bank to make a new checking account, whether you're in a restaurant, whether you're paying e-commerce, whatever, just on a very, very high level, right? Before we dive into blockchain, what does data itself mean to you? Just very high level.
Well, the unique thing that has happened with, we're in an age that is oftentimes referred to as an information age.
Right.
And what has happened is things that used to be manually recorded have been facilitated through the use of technology. The ability to record more and more transactions accurately and correctly has made for an explosion in terms of the capabilities of financial institutions, but everything that we do.
Right.
Having, just a very, very simple thing. When I was growing up, my parents had a phone book of people that were close to them outside of the phone books themselves. Those things have disappeared. Completely, simply because now we can have everything, all the phone calls and our phone book in our cell phones, our smartphones. So all these things have gone away, and what's storing these things is the database. So these data points that used to be manually done has now migrated to actually through technology and become created a lubrication for transactions and communication.
Wow. Wow, that is amazing. So that's a good segue into blockchain itself, right? So when I think of blockchain, I think of, a revolutionary movement, kind of moving away from gatekeepers and centralization to more of a decentralized way of doing things. I think of, things like peer-to-peer networks, encryption, those kind of keywords kind of jump at me. Can you just give, based on what I just said, what is blockchain technology as far as the whole data model? Right.
There's a couple of basic elements to blockchain technology.
Right.
The very first one you've actually mentioned is peer-to-peer type mirroring. Existing technology does have some of that capabilities. So there are a lot of central repositories that or databases that people are highly reliant upon.
Okay.
But as a security measure, what those firms do is replicate or mirror that data to other servers. So we've always had the ability to create a kind of a decentralized version of using data, even though we've become highly reliant on that single source.
Single source being centralized.
The centralized.
Yeah. Okay.
So the very first thing that blockchain has is this idea of decentralized data. So rather than just mirroring it out, the network itself becomes the source for all the computers. So every node, and that's like every server, we use the word node instead of server.
Yep.
Every node has a complete copy of the entire database. So if any server failed, whether it be a memory chip or a power issue or someone kicking the server, the system doesn't go down. So you have this extra layer of comfort and security in the sense that you're not going to be losing data.
Right.
The second aspect of it, as you also mentioned, is the use of cryptography. So the use of cryptography is a couple of reasons why. The first is that you actually then create and validate a particular transaction. Because what happens then is there's a crypto cipher applied to it, and then a hash, which is a string of letters and numbers that is unique to that transaction, is created. Now, hashes are very, very difficult to actually work backwards. So through that, you've now validated the transaction. So if you and I were doing this, let's say I sent you 3 Bitcoin. Okay. Well, this transaction would have its own unique hash, and as it's rolled up into what becomes blocks.
Right.
So the use of cryptography is important simply because it acts as the first layer of authentication for transactions. The third thing is that as these transactions get rolled up into blocks, blocks are kind of unique. Blocks are a compilation of transactions that have happened, and they're added with a timestamp to each other. So if you thought of it as like a train, each new block is the next car in front of it. We start with the caboose, and we keep building upon it. And you can't go back and change things in the past through the use of blocks because they're time-stamped. And if there you also use cryptography. So if you changed any of the prior transactions, it breaks the whole chain. Right. So now you have this idea of immutability. So you can't go back and change things that have happened. So you have the three things that we've mentioned is that it's a distribution network. The second is the use of cryptography, and the third is the combination of these things into blocks. And blocks are just a conceptual idea of just an amalgam of transactions hashed together into one unit.
So as the transactions accumulate, they're sorted into blocks, and then the crypto signatures or whatever apply to them, which tie into the security and the
correct
and all that stuff. Wow, I never thought about it like that. That's very, very interesting. Okay, so you spoke about security. You actually answered one of my questions I was about to ask you. You spoke about security. What are the other benefits of blockchain besides security and stuff?
Well, the other two components of blockchains is that you have what's called permissionless blockchains and permission blockchains. Permissionless blockchains are what oftentimes referred to as public blockchains. So things like Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of the derivatives of Ethereum that are out there, anything with a crypto coin primarily is reliant on a public blockchain. Now, what makes them public is that anybody can actually see what the transactions are. You have this transparency of transactions. I may not know, if I'm looking at a blockchain, that the transaction between you and me of that 3 Bitcoins is between you and me, because our identities are hidden through codes and through the hash. But I can still see the transaction. So having this public blockchain provides this level of transaction and transparency that is important to understanding and the use of it. So then you're not reliant on a system or a bank. In the case of Bitcoin, there is no central authority. The network is the authority, and if there's a node that wants to do something malicious, it's prevented from doing it. The other thing about blockchain is that in the public chains, there's this concept called consensus, so that when you build each of these blocks, everybody has to kind of agree that the transactions that are put in the blocks are correct. And they do this through a consensus mechanism called proof of work for Bitcoin and for Ethereum. And proof of work is kind of a complicated system. So the transactions are all hashed, and they're put into a queue to create the block. And then there's this competition for, they refer to that competition as mining, and the reason why they do that, I'm going to digress for a second, is because Bitcoin was originally thought of as digital gold. So we started to use terminology that was related to mining. So the idea that how do you get gold? You go and you mine it out of the ground. So how do you create Bitcoins? You use your computer to mine it out of the process, out of the technology. Why is it digital gold? Because it's a monetary value. So Bitcoin has that terminology. But so what happens is when these miners start to build the block, there's a mathematical algorithm or puzzle that they have to solve, and it's called a nonce. That's what everybody's looking for, is this nonce, and the ability for them to guess what it is, because you can't figure it out. You have to guess. So the more servers that you have that are mining, the more guesses that you could make. So you have tens of thousands of machines all competing to build a block, like in Bitcoin, every 10 minutes by finding this nonce. And they're just using these graphic processing units to actually expedite the guesses until somebody gets it. And then once somebody's get it, it's a very simple solution to verify, is that the correct nonce? Once it is, the block is built. They then start the whole process over again.
Wow. You made me think of something that I wasn't going to bring up in this conversation. And you don't have to answer it. But I just sometimes think about, you mentioned gold, right? Bitcoin, gold.
Sure.
And gold, I'm sorry, with regular currency, we have these commodities that drive the value of currency and things. And I sometimes think about how that ties into Bitcoin, because there's no regulatory or regulator commodity driving Bitcoin in a sense. So I'm always curious how that works in that world.
Sure. Well, really the question that you're asking is what type of asset is Bitcoin?
Exactly.
So oftentimes people think of it as a commodity, which then has a physical presence, but it's most frequently referred to as a currency, which is unique. So currencies that exist now are issued by somebody. There's a central authority who issues them. So it generally is a government.
Yep.
So what's unique about then currencies is that the government backs up or supports the currency. So you can have situations like Venezuela, where Venezuela's entire economy has collapsed, and so there's no support for the currency, so the currencies become worthless. Or Argentina, where you have hyperinflation, again, no support for the currency by the government. They just keep printing it, and assume that it's going to resolve everything. The U.S. is considered the reserve currency of the world, so about 68 to 80% of all transactions are done in U.S. dollars, where the dollar is part of the transaction. So oil is priced in dollars. Most commodities are priced in dollars. And so if you're, say, in the UK and you're actually trying to do a transaction, say, in pounds, you actually have to convert the pounds to dollars to do the purchase. What's unique about currencies is that not only are they centrally issued by governments, but what backs them up is the ability for the government to tax. Now, that can be a tax on the people. It can be a tax on a transaction, so a value-added tax. It can be any number of different things. So the things that back up fiat currencies, and that's the term that is used, is that the governments that are supporting them and their ability to both support and also tax. So there's a value added there. So they create value from it. With Bitcoin, there is no central authority. So who is the person issuing it? Well, it's just a code that allows for new Bitcoins to be issued. Currently, we're about 17 million issued out of a maximum 21 million that was originally authorized in the original code. That can't be changed. So you would say to yourself, well, 21 million Bitcoins is really not enough to do anything. But what was designed is that each Bitcoin is able to be broken up into what's referred to as a Satoshi, which is 1/100 millionth of a Bitcoin. So it really has this vast capacity to actually act as a currency. And so the more people who use it and own it, allows for the value of it to maintain itself and to stabilize. Now, unfortunately, with cryptos, they're a highly volatile market. In this past year, which was 2018, we saw almost an 80% drop in the values of all cryptos across the board. Bitcoin being the example, it was at $20,000 in November or December of 2017. And by the end of 2018, it was about 3,300. So just a huge collapse in value over the course of the time. But the idea behind it is this economic idea of what is a currency. Bitcoin is best thought of as a currency, and so it behaves in some ways that way. And when you trade it, you actually trade it like a currency because currencies are always traded in pairs. So if you're buying Bitcoin with dollars, so it's what is the Bitcoin dollar exchange? If you're buying it in euros, what's the Bitcoin euro? So it's always in pairs.
Wow. And I caught they used the name Satoshi. He's the guy who published the first article on cryptocurrency and crypto language, right?
No, he's not. He's actually not.
He's not. I thought I read somewhere that he was one who published.
He is the first to publish a paper on the development of a digital currency using blockchain, cryptography, Merkle trees, proof of work, which creates eliminates a double spend problem into one idea. He is not the first to actually issue.
Who was the first?
Well, probably the most interesting one was the NSA. They actually 11 years or 12 years prior to Satoshi's paper, which is just only 10 years ago, by the way. So back in 96, they issued a paper on the creation of digital currency that he drew upon. And there was a number of different people who created things like eCash, eGold, that existed before what Satoshi did. Satoshi didn't create blockchain.
Oh, of course not.
He didn't. He didn't create cryptography. He didn't create consensus mechanisms. He didn't create distributed peer-to-peer networks. But what he did do is he put them all together for the first time in a way that was actually safe and secure.
Right. Absolutely. Good to know. So back to blockchain. We know, back in 2015, 16, it was a really heavy trending keyword. Especially in fintech, right? So we know banks like Bank of America, Citigroup were acquiring all these patents.
Actually, Bank of America is the #1 patent holder for all blockchain technology.
Absolutely. Yep. I was in that world. So we know the banks are heavily invested in this. We know for the reasons you just cited, right? We know Microsoft and their Azure platform.
Now supports it.
Now supports blockchain. Alibaba is foraging. So all these companies are, from your experience with the Blockchain Academy, what's the most unique or use or integration of blockchain you've seen so far?
Well,
that you can think of.
That's a tough question to answer simply because there are so many innovative aspects. Right. The use cases for blockchain are really quite diverse. I mean, the best way to think of blockchain is it's an infrastructure technology. Mm-hmm. It makes things better and more trustworthy for things that we already use. Right. So as a consumer, we may never know that the back end has been converted from a centralized database to a blockchain system, and not even care for that matter. Right. So, but from an infrastructure standpoint, it's now all of a sudden introducing a lot of great things. Now, some of the things that are of interest is say in the medical community, the ability for individuals to own their own patient health index or files. Currently, the average person through their lifetime meets with 16.8 different doctors during the course of their lifetime. Wow. Every visit to a doctor is using 3 separate databases to actually record things, and there's not consolidation between it. There was a study in Boston at Boston Medical where there was 20 different systems to record patient data, and one of the most basic elements is the birth date of the patient. It was done differently in all 20 instances, so there's no way to even consolidate it. Well, through the use of blockchain, you could actually have a consolidation, which would do a lot of really interesting things. One is it would allow for medical professionals and practitioners to see a patient from a holistic standpoint now, because now we have all this centralized. Mm-hmm. It allows the patient to actually control it because they can actually now grant a practitioner access to it or revoke it, which doesn't happen right now. So that just from the public health side is interesting. Or even things like on clinical trials, the ability for these researchers who are doing clinical trials on medical issues, the ability for them to have a more comprehensive understanding of not only who the patients are, but also what the outcomes are and all the variables that are introduced. Now, that data would be, from a public health standpoint, highly impactful. So I used the healthcare as a simple one simply because that's personal to everybody. Right. But something as simple as using blockchain, IBM and Walmart is doing that with regards to produce that they purchase. So this past year, it was, I guess, Q4 in 2018, we had I don't know if it was a salmonella scare, but romaine lettuce was all of a sudden contaminated. Well, the problem was it wasn't all in blockchain, so they actually had to say nobody can eat romaine lettuce until we actually figured this out. Well, if you would have had that on blockchain, you would have been able to almost instantly know where the romaine lettuce, this contaminated romaine lettuce, came from, where is it in the supply chain, and how can we block that and not have it impact all the other well-performing and healthy romaine lettuce heads that we wanted to eat. So blockchain would have solved that.
And with that example you just gave, it'll be the specific nodes in this network will fire off wherever the problem is.
They would identify.
They will identify where the problem is and feedback to the system instantly.
Right.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Wow. It's funny how the concept of centralization and having a holistic view on your data has become such a principal concept in this day and age across all types of business, whether it's marketing, finance, all the examples you gave about having this whole view. I mean, most of the business I do now is with marketing intelligence, and those kinds of conversations are happening as well as far as how do we consolidate our data. It'll be interesting to see how this applies into not just marketing, but just, as it evolves. And which leads to my next question. What do you see as the future, or what disruptions do you see coming ahead, if you can speak on that?
Well, sure. I mean, you can see the seeds that are germinating now. They're not trees yet, but you can see that they're germinated in the use of other emerging technologies. Blockchain is best thought of as a foundational technology. And so as a result, things like the ability to consolidate vast amounts of data into one trusted source is of high value. Well, then that brings up the next aspect of what you actually do, and that is big data.
Yeah.
How do you do analytics on these larger data sets? So it's been often argued by people that say Facebook, as an example, is nothing more than a market research firm. They're consolidating vast quantities of data on individuals and then reselling that data.
This is true.
But it's on the social aspects of things. It's not like on the physical assets. It's not part of a supply chain. It's not part of the financial. But the use of that data has created new opportunities, and the ability to analyze that data has been phenomenal. Now, another emerging technology that's working in tandem with that is, of course, the variations of machine learning, artificial intelligence, deep learning,
right.
All of these things in terms of understanding correlations, higher levels of correlations that we as humans may not be able to see due to the vast amount of data. Well, if all of a sudden we can use these artificial intelligent protocols to mine that, now all of a sudden we can actually have insights that can be quite impactful.
Wow. So one of my last questions. There's so many blockchain hubs, thousands I would imagine now, springing up here and there.
What do you describe as a hub? How do you define
so
it?
any centralized network or projects, should I say, that are incorporating blockchain technology into a business line or business stream,
Sure.
and so on. So with all these different things happening, how do you approach standardization, right? So companies like Interledger, which have a couple of blockchain projects under their wing to try and standardize a process or a way of looking at data or measurement or whatever. Do you see that being an issue in the future? In other words, my simple question is, with so many people...
How are they going to interoperate?
Yeah.
So Interledger is a very interesting one. They've actually come up with a way for using what I refer to as Generation 2 blockchains to communicate with one another. So they're incompatible by themselves, and they're isolated by themselves, and they've come up with a protocol to actually enable that communication or sharing of data between blockchains. My view of the future is that these second generation protocols and blockchains are going to just drift away. We're already to Generation 4 blockchains, and how I define a generation is based on the transactions per second. So originally, Bitcoin was able to only do one transaction per second. As of, say, last year, it was somewhere between 7 to 10 transactions per second. Ethereum blew them out of the water by being able to do double, so 15, maybe to 18 transactions per second. And that created a lot of limitation because now you have a physical constraint in terms of the number of transactions you can use. So then we started to get to some Generation 3, like Steemit actually is one example where you can have tens of thousands of transactions per second happening all the time. But we're in Generation 4 where we have things like EOS or Stellar, where they start at a simplest point at 10,000 transactions per second, but can actually scale up to millions. The data networking firm Akami, they've actually announced last year in conjunction with a Japanese bank, a blockchain solution that will have the capacity to 10 million transactions per second. Those are enterprise-grade systems.
Right.
They are then capable of being developed into such an array with governance tools that doesn't exist on the Generation 2 blockchains, that the interoperability between these disappears, because now all of a sudden you have so much more capability, the ability to have them tap into one another and act as oracles, meaning sharing data back and forth.
This has been a great conversation. So what do you see to Capital Conversation blockchain doing in 2019? What do you see? What's the future of blockchain? What do you have to look forward to?
Sure. Well, I think that we're at the point where we now are looking at blockchain as a technology that we can use. 2017 was about the hype of cryptocurrencies. 2018 was a sobering year of realizing that there's a collapse in that. And now what are we looking at? We are now down to the gems. What is blockchain technology and what can it really do for us. And I think that firms that are going to be looking at adopting blockchain have to be a little more aggressive. Those firms who are not going to be looking at blockchain should realize that they're going to be out of business. And 2019 is really going to start to be the sorting between this wheat and the chaff.
Wow. Should be an interesting year.
Yes.
Brian, thank you so much for talking with me, and I'm so honored to speak to someone like you. Brian is an awesome guru. He's a good person. I'm happy I know him. Please check out his website at theblockchainacademy.com. It's a very great resource, lots of great resources on blockchain. If you're invested in this business, like he said, blockchain is going to cause a lot of disruption, and it's good if you get on the bandwagon, ride the train. So he's a good person to be in contact with in this space. So thanks again, Brian.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate your time. And I'm Ben, the Sticktive, and I'll see you soon. Take care.